Lilith is many things. She's a Mesopotamian deity. She is the first wife of Adam. She is a succubus, a fallen angel, a demon, a dark goddess, and she is potentially the very first vampire. So let's talk about Lilith on Vampires Before Dracula. Lilith has been having quite the year. She's been the overarching villain in two massive properties, Diablo 4 and Marvel's Midnight Suns. Two completely different games, but with arguably similar depictions of Lilith. And Lilith is a character that has appeared in many vampire and related stories. And you may be familiar with her from such places as, for example, True Blood, where she shows up in one of the later seasons as the primordial vampire, as the first vampire of all time, almost sort of like a vampire goddess. There is a vampire Bible in that show that is called the Book of Lilith. And at one point, she possesses Bill Compton and makes him do a lot of things that are very out of character. You might have seen her in the pages of Crimson, where she is the mother of all vampires, and takes a very specific interest in the main character, Alex Elder. Or for those of our younger viewers who perhaps have watched Shadowhunters, you'll recognize Lilith as the sort of dark demon goddess who possesses Jace and tries to kill Clary Morgenstern. Or you might remember her from Supernatural, or the Castlevania games, or Bordello of Blood, or Dark Stalkers. She's usually portrayed as a raven-haired vixen with a plunging neckline who men are absolutely powerless against and whom demons and vampires bow before. And I certainly get excited anytime I'm watching or reading some sort of vampire media and somebody mentions Lilith in hushed tones, or finds an old woodcut picture of her in a dusty old book referencing the origin of vampires. But how did we get here? How did we get to this point where Lilith is sort of a regular character or villain in vampire stories, and she's regularly regarded as the mother of all vampires? Well, let's take a look at where she comes from and the journey that she went on to get to this point. Probably the best place to start is with the oldest written story that we have access to in the world. And this is the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Lilith is mentioned. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a story that goes back 4,000 years to the Sumerians. And Lilith appears in the story albeit a later translation of it during the Assyrian Empire. But in the story, Gilgamesh goes to exorcise a spirit from a sacred tree in Inanna's garden. And there is a snake, and there is something called a zoo bird, which have taken up residence in the tree, and they try to bite and attack anybody who comes close. And so Gilgamesh exorcises the spirit that's in the tree and kills the snake, and the bird flies away, and the spirit of Lilith leaves the tree as this bird with this bird to go create a nest someplace else. So now you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't sound very scary. And at face value, it's not. And there's even scholarship to question whether or not this story is actually even referring to Lilith herself. But all of this just to say, Lilith is an entity, and she is a character that probably goes further back into prehistory than that. And in fact, there may be echoes of a being like Lilith that you can find in ancient cultures throughout the world, which suggests that she has been a character that has been with humanity for a very long time. Lilith was feared in the ancient world as sort of a home invader of sorts during the hours of the night. She would either come in and she would kill babies in their sleep, or she would steal babies in their sleep straight out of the crib, or she was known to crawl into the beds of men at night and make love to them while they slept and steal their seed. Sort of an original succubus. And a fear of Lilith continued for thousands of years in the Middle East, the Near East, the Mediterranean. There are spells that were created to protect people from Lilith. There were inscriptions on ceremonial bowls that have been dug up by archaeologists that have sort of wards against Lilith written in them. There are silver amulets that had protection spells against Lilith inscribed in them that could be hung on the cribs of babies or put around babies' necks to protect them, or wards that could be put on the exterior of the house to protect the house from Lilith in the middle of the night. So she was the real deal a long time ago. And when we're talking about vampires before Dracula, it's tough to get much before Dracula than Lilith. But why do we consider Lilith to be a vampire? Because she was also a blood drinker. Oh yes, credentials. There are only 3 demons that are actually named in the Bible, and specifically in the Old Testament. And Lilith is one of them. But she doesn't get a lot of ink. She's mentioned in Isaiah 34, and allow me to read you this very brief passage. And this is a prophecy referring to a land called Edom in the Near East. And it goes, "Her nobles shall be no more, Edom's nobles shall be no more, nor shall kings be proclaimed there. All her princes are gone. Her castles shall be overgrown with thorns, her fortresses with thistles and briars. She shall become an abode for jackals and a haunt for ostriches." Sounds awesome. "Wildcats shall meet with desert beasts. Satyrs shall call to one another. There shall the Lilith repose and find for herself a place to rest." So this sort of shows that, and especially to the ancient Hebrew people, that Lilith was a regularly known being, a sinister, dark spirit that was feared. Now, you may grab the copy of the Bible off your shelf, and depending on the translation, the name Lilith may have been translated as owl or screech owl. She was very much associated with the owl, and the etymology of her name may have been similar to a word known for owls. So in that way, she has been associated with owls, and going all the way back to the zoo bird in the halupu tree in Inanna's garden, as well as with the serpent. So Lilith has also been associated. She has also been associated with the serpent. But that's all that we get in the Bible about Lilith. Now, I know that you, as a savvy connoisseur of vampire stories and ancient Near Eastern mythology, are probably saying, "But Sean, what about this other thing?" And you are absolutely right. Wasn't Lilith the first wife of Adam before Eve? Thank you very much for asking. So, yes, and no. Lilith's only actual appearance in the Hebrew Bible is the one that I just read for you. However, somewhere in the Middle Ages, there was a group of rabbis who were trying to figure out exactly what may have happened in some rather curious wording in Genesis. And I certainly am not a Jewish scholar or rabbinical scholar or anything like that, so I will not attempt to put myself in the mind of someone who is a religious authority, because that would be ridiculous, especially for me. However, if we put ourselves in the minds of storytellers, there is a want to connect dots in stories. And if you have a question mark about one particular passage of a story, and you have a character that you really like from another part of the story, one might be compelled to make a connection there and do a little bit of fan fiction, if you will, in order to get things to play better, get things to make more sense. I am reminded of the Coppola's Dracula movie, where in trying to sort of fix some... Sorry, I should not say fix. I certainly am now running with a group of folks who look at the written page of Dracula as being perfect, so I will not use the word fix. However, in adapting a piece of literature for a later generation, for a much later generation, you have to ask the question, how did Renfield know that Dracula was coming? Because Renfield never met Dracula, and there is debate as to whether they ever actually physically met one another at all before Dracula showed up and was like deep into the book and was like, Renfield, invite me into the asylum. So as a way of fixing that, screenwriter James Hart decided, well, maybe Renfield was the first solicitor to go to Castle Dracula, and Jonathan was the second. Renfield came back crazy and had to be put into an asylum, and he kept shouting about the Dark Master and eating bugs. That's a very little change to make to the story, but it suddenly made Renfield make a lot more sense and sort of sit into the narrative better, as it were. So that's a long way around of getting back to the premise of being in the mind of a storyteller, where you have an issue where certain sources referred to Eve as the second Eve, or the next Eve. And that prompts the question of, Eve was the second one? Who was the first? And so a very creative mind decided to place Lilith in there as Adam's first wife. And then suddenly this story evolves about God creating both man and woman out of clay, as opposed to just Adam out of clay. And that woman was Lilith. And you had Adam and Lilith as equals in the Garden of Eden. And this story goes on to say that Lilith wanted to be on top during sex, but Adam was like, no, I'm the man. I should be on top. You should do what I say, and you should lay on the bottom, which is your proper place. And Lilith essentially said, fuck you, dude, and then walked the fuck out of Eden and left him. And Adam basically cries to God and says, she left, bring her back. And God sends 3 angels to Lilith, who is wandering out in the land of Nod, outside of the garden. And they come to her and they say, you really need to come back. And she's like, there's no way I'm going back to that dude. And they're like, we're going to have to invoke a punishment on you for all time. You're going to have to be cursed. And all of your children are going to be demons, and a certain section of them are going to be slain every time you give birth to them. And this is the punishment for you not coming back. And she was like, happily, I will happily take that instead of going back to that dude. I'm paraphrasing here. obviously. But then, when all these curses are applied to Lilith, and she's now a creature of darkness and the mother of demons and all these things, then the angels have to come back to God and say, she called her bluff, so we had to do it. And God is like, okay. And then he, instead of making woman out of clay, then he takes one of Adam's ribs while he's asleep and turns that into Eve. And then Eve, as being created from Adam, is now a subservient creature to him. She is less than, and theoretically, everything is great in the world after that time. And for all of those of you who are going to leave me comments about the veracity of all of this stuff in any direction, feel free to do that. That's what the comments section is for, of course. But I'll just reiterate here that this is not holy canon. These are the writings of people who were much later, hundreds and hundreds of years later, later than the Dead Sea Scrolls even, who basically sort of put this together as biblical fan fiction in a way. So I am sorry to burst anyone's bubble who thought that this was perhaps a sort of lost or suppressed version of Genesis that goes back to the beginning of the story. It doesn't seem to be. However, that doesn't make any difference. Lilith is now widely known in niche circles to have been the first wife of Adam. And that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool origin story. And so this makes her a very attractive character for a vampire story and for an origin vampire, because she is the first woman, and she was cursed by God for not wanting to be for not wanting to go with the flow, to not be conventional. And this has also made her, in more recent times, a popular character in neo-pagan circles and as a feminist icon, because she essentially was the first woman to sort of make her own choice and choose herself over her man. So out of all of this, we have this wonderful 4,000-year quilt, this patchwork quilt of stories and ideas about who Lilith was and how she fits into whatever it is that we're making. So whether that be using her in astrology, using her in a tarot deck, putting her in a vampire story, or a couple of AAA video games that have come out, Lilith is an excellent, very rich, very nuanced female character who makes an excellent vampire queen. So, how do you think you are going to use Lilith? Because you can go all sorts of different directions with her. You can use her in the way that she is depicted in the Middle Ages of being the first wife of Adam. You can choose that very Abrahamic story of her. Or you can go with more of the demon aspect of Lilith and say that she is even a fallen angel. She could have been present during the War of Heaven, and as part of the losing side was cast out and became a demon at that point, which pushes her even further back than the Garden of Eden. Or you may go with the route that she is actually, as she is celebrated by neo-pagans today, a dark goddess. A goddess of the night, a goddess of the moon, a goddess of sorcery and dark magic and empowering things, similar to other goddesses like Hecate or Artemis or Nyx? Or are you going to treat her as the first vampire who was mortal at one point and then became a vampire through whatever curse or dark magic or transgressional act that she committed? Are you going to have Lilith as the mother of all vampires? Is she going to be a queen of vampires who is very much in the present, who is ruling from some dark underground city or the top of some mountain temple somewhere? Does she sense the thoughts and actions of all of her vampire descendants, no matter how far away from her they are, even if she is in a deep supernatural sleep? Is she currently absent from the world? Was she slain or banished in biblical times? Or was she the ruler of some ancient civilization that we don't know about today? Sort of an immortal god queen for some dark empire that still has some echoes down to the modern day? Or does she sleep in some long-forgotten vault somewhere, just waiting to be resurrected or woken back up? Is it the goal of some vampire or poor wayward cultist to try and revive her? Or are you going to place her as the protagonist? Is she perhaps going to once have been the queen of vampires, but either lost or gave up most of her powers in a moment of self-sacrifice or realization of humility, and now perhaps she walks the earth as just sort of a wise woman who very few people know her true identity? Does she bestow gifts on vampires and witches who cross her path, who don't recognize her or don't realize who she was until she's already passed on again? Or is she truly transcendent? Is she a goddess of night who only appears to those vampires who summon her or invoke her name, looking for her blessing? Was she a survivor of Eden? Or does she predate religion entirely? Is she an ancient enemy of humanity who predated the Sumerians settling between the Tigris and the Euphrates? Is she, as she is regularly depicted, the wife of Lucifer or Asmodeus? Is her presence in the world a sign of the beginning of the end times? Or is she just a name that your protagonists come across in some ancient book or scroll, or carved into the side of some temple or monument, while your main characters are researching the vampire who is plaguing them? Only you can answer that question. Lilith is a character of Middle Eastern mythology, and possibly the mythology of all humankind. And as such, she is in the public domain and available to use for your vampire project. So tell us, how will Lilith appear in your story? There's a place where you can do that. That's down in the comments. We would love to hear about it. The imagery that you have seen in this episode all came from a photo shoot that I did with my very good friend VALERIE PEREZ, portraying Lilith. And as she put it, when I asked her if she would be interested in doing that, she said, "Oh yes, I'm very excited to portray the original bad girl." So thank you, VALERIE. You did a fantastic job. And all of these images will be appearing on the Vampire Castle's Instagram page. So head on over to Instagram and subscribe to the Vampire's Castle, and you can enjoy Val as Lilith to your heart's content. Your vampire dollars. I have been waiting a long time to suggest this, but this is Crimson, And this is a graphic novel by Humberto Ramos and Brian Augustyn. And it is a fantastic modern-day vampire story that takes place in New York City. It's got vampires, it's got werewolves, it's got demons, it's got angels, it's got fallen angels, it's got Little Red Riding Hood, it's got St. George, and it has Lilith as the mother of all vampires, and it's in a very satisfying way that keeps her as the first wife of Adam, but also sort of this amazing demon vampire sort of demigod type character. And there's a lot of excellent sort of references to Jewish mysticism and stuff like that in there. There are dragons in the thing. There's a whole like Book of Revelations is very important to this comic. There's even an appearance by the Knight Azo, who is another vampire that we're going to be getting to in Vampires Before Dracula series. So he's coming up. But I wholly recommend this. It is a fantastic read, and also a really sort of an iconic moment in vampire comic books from the 2000s. It really sort of was the bar setter back during those years. So that's what I recommend if you're looking for just a super rich vampire comic book story. Lilith has become a fan favorite character in recent vampire media. So if you're looking for an ancient progenitor vampire that goes back deep into ancient times, Lilith is an excellent choice. Thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you next time.